What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to 8 Cubes. I'm KMBest, he's Lambie Series, and we collectively have played kind of a lot of Marvel Snap recently, actually. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into the first topic, which is Agatha's Real, courtesy of a deck put together by Husky Puppies, playing Agatha in a shell that is basically built around 3s and 5s. If anything, it's like an evolution of the Goon Knight deck. It's added the sort of power of an Agatha deck because you get this Agatha with a discard into Ghost Rider or Ebony Blade. And so you effectively are able to play a lot of very powerful turn 4s backed up by like Black Bolt on turn 5, Claw Stature turn 6. That's the way the deck looks to sort of play itself out. You play one of your 3 drops that allows you to play Agatha, whether that be Wave or Moon Knight or Lady Sif, and then you either play Ghost Rider or the Ebony Blade on 4, and then you just do what we described for the remainder of it. And it's just a very efficient points deck that is notably very good into Wiccan stuff right now, at least the traditional Wiccan builds. Very large number of points that this deck can put on the board.
Yeah, turns out when you have an AI controlling half your brain, it's actually better than playing normal decks, right? Like with Agatha, if Agatha being the way she is right now, you're actually like partially a cyborg per se. I just wanted to get that out of the way because like you only need to control your odd turns, right? The turn, and then you just fill it up with like stuff that is good. Like there's a lot of good 5s that you play. You can play like Black Bolt, you play Legion, you play what's that called? You play Vision and stuff like that. And on your even turns, well, Ghost Rider gets auto played sometimes, because
it's not even
you discarded your Agatha.
Like the way it
can you play Miss Marvel as well?
No, the issue you run into is you need to be a Moon Knight deck. Because Moon Knight does, and that means you can't play any other force. You have to just be Ghost Rider there, so that Moon Knight won't hit you in the audience, right?
True.
And so you end up with a deck that is like, you talk about like it's controlling like, it's controlling half the turns, right? Kind of, but really it's only controlling turn 2. Like, if the deck is functioning, Agatha is not in your hand on turn 3. Because you played Lady Sif, you played Moon Knight, right? Or you played Wave, and then she'll play herself on turn 4. But she's not ever controlling the turns that matter, and if she is, you've already lost because the whole deck is predicated on that turn 4 thing. So it's less like you outsourcing your brain to a cyborg. We're not chat GPTing this. It's more just like what we've done is we've said, we want as little of your input in here as possible, so we're getting none of it, and I will take control. We're like reversing the Agatha equation.
Yeah, that's true actually if you think about it. Yeah, the fact that Ghost Rider just pulls back a 14 power thing it's so big. Consistently, right? It's kind of super important. And obviously if you don't have the Ghost Rider in your hand on turn 4, well, there are still probably some trees that you can play, right, at the end of the day. And then obviously your turn 5 is going to be just super strong because you just run out of good 5s in the game ever. Yeah, so I feel like the thing about Agatha right now is also, it's very... I wouldn't say it's exactly the most like big brain thing ever, but I think what Husky did was just the deck building. The deck building was very well put together, like the whole idea behind like, all right, I'm gonna get rid of this Agatha, I'm gonna play just a bunch of good cards, and then it's all gonna work out. I think it's very well put together, and I think it's just a ton of points, right? Like you mentioned, like the Wiccan decks, they want to do like what, a Liar View on turn 6 and stuff like that. But all these things don't really care, it's numbers, it's huge numbers that like that invalidates the ability for the Wiccan decks to like a Liar View effectively.
That's what I think is so fascinating about this deck. I had a video with Husky. By the time this comes out, that will have been out. So I'm going to talk about it in the past tense, where we talked about this. And like, it is a deck that all the brain power is in the deck building. You're not actually brain powering when you're playing the game. You're like just doing the thing that puts a bunch of numbers on the board every single time, right? Like your game plan is actually super on rails. You play one of the 3/3 drops that lets you Agatha, whether that be Moon Knight or Wave or Lady Sif. Then, if you had a Black Knight, you play the Ebony Blade. If you didn't have a Black Knight, you play a Ghost Rider. If you had none of those things, you've probably lost the game, but maybe not, we'll figure it out. But because Agatha is in your hand all the time, and as long as you get one of those 3 drops, you are probably going to get her out. The only scenarios where that's not happening is where you only have Moon Knight and you have Ghost Rider in hand and you lose the 50-50, or you don't draw any of those 3 drops at all, which is a very unlikely scenario because of the fact that she starts in your hand. And then once you've done that, your turn 4 is a big Agatha thing, whether that be the Ebony Blade or a Ghost Rider. Your turn 5 is a Black Bolt. Your turn 6 is like Claw, and a Stature. Or Claw and a Hydra Bob. And it's just like, that's just a lot of numbers in unpredictable spaces.
I mean, if you think about it, like, okay, so it's not exactly like AI or Cyborg, but it's like your decision tree is very like,
Yes.
if it's not A, it's B.
Yes.
And then you move on to the next decision tree. If it's not A, it's B. It's a very, okay, I know it's funny to say this, but it's a very like streamer / content creator deck, right? But it totally lets you interact with the chat at every single point in time because you literally have like 1 or 2 decision trees every turn. So it's like all the brain power, like you said, has been like done in the deck building. And I feel like Husky just nailed it for us when it comes to like using a deck that allows you to like interact with chat as well.
He crushed it. Like, he just an absolute deck building masterclass. I never thought Agatha would be anything close to real. I never thought it would be in the Goon Knight shell of all things. And here it is, both of those things. Let's talk about War Machine. Now, I know a lot of people are very high on these Storm War Machine decks. You can see that we've named this Meme Machine. Lampy's a little bit lower on those than I think everyone else is. I initially was low on them, but then it was like, you know what? I can understand why people would want to do this. I just think that if you're not pulling off the whole combo, A, there's a lot of other people who are going to be able to beat you because they're playing Madam Web stuff. Storm's not very good on her own right now. B, other people are playing War Machine and Legion, and so you get that downside as well. So, honestly, like, I see the appeal, and I think there might be something there, but I worry that it's not right now.
Yeah, so these kind of decks, okay, so to me, my issue with all these kind of decks from the dawn of time is that things need to be drawn in sort of a specific order, right? But obviously with this deck and like Marvel Snap being a 12-card deck kind of game, you do eventually see almost all your cards. It's just that with this one, you kind of need it in a very specific order, right? Like you need to do the Storm first, then you need to do the Machine, then after that, then you Legion. Like you really need in a specific order. So that's why I'm a bit more lower on this one because like it's not just that you need to see the cards, you need to see the cards on the exact turn, so it's a bit harder to pull off for sure. But obviously when you pull it off, we'll talk about this at the final topic, but deterministic win conditions, like people just like to do things that they know that they can snap on. Like if they see Storm, War Machine, Legion in hand, it's just like they will just snap regardless of what you are playing, it's just like a safety net kind of thing. So I feel like that's why this Meme Machine deck might be a bit more prominent than I think. It's gonna be a bit more seen than I think it should be because I don't think it's actually that good. Because like I said, it has to be drawn in a very specific order. Like half the time, if you're playing a normal deck that just puts normal points, like even if you play the Agatha deck, half the time you are doing like more points on average consistently than trying to like scam a win by making your opponent unable to play the game. Like I guess with Professor X in the past, the pre-nerf Professor X, it was definitely more of a menace and more real because it's literally one card. You just need to prof on 4 or 5. This one you need to draw 3 cards in a row in a specific like setup. So I would say this one is a little bit harder, not a little bit, a lot more harder to set up. So if you guys are like upset that this might be a Professor X thing, I don't think it will be. I think Professor X was Professor X. This is 3-card Professor X, so probably not gonna be as useful.
Yeah, I think my issue is that like when you do the combo, it is awesome. You win the game. Yes. It's dope as hell. But in order to do that, you are devoting 3 of the slots in your deck to being a Storm deck, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm a Storm deck, I'm a War Machine deck, let me lean into that. Let me be a Storm deck that plays Ebony Maw. Let me play maybe the Infinite here. And when you do that enough, you start to wonder if the free win is worth playing the Storm. Because it doesn't happen that often, and Storm is so bad right now. That is a 3-2, dude. And like, everyone is playing something that can get into that lane. The Agatha decks are nightmares because not only do they have Claw, they also have Legion. So if you snap the combo, they'll just Legion it, so your Legion won't actually hit the Storm because you're not going to be ahead when that happens. The Madam Web decks, if you're not comboing off, will just win the Storm lane. So you as a deck builder have to build to win the Storm lane when you don't have War Machine. And when you do that, you start losing to decks that are better at moving stuff into the lane than you. And you just Storm is the weak point of this archetype. Where it's like, you are playing a 3-2, guys. You are playing a 3-2. It's hard to win against people when you do that. It's hard. It is.
Yeah, also War Machine is just a 4/7. Like I can see people just playing it in their like whatever decks, just because like the meta is the way it is right now, which is also very similar to the card we're gonna talk about next.
Legion. Lambie's probably favorite card ever, is in a pretty okay
Yes.
spot right now, partly because of all the people doing what we're talking about, right? If you're running into someone who is Storm and War Machining and Legioning them, you can beat them by playing your own War Machine, but you can also beat them by playing Legion, because their whole plan is Storm, War Machine, Legion. That is 9 points by turn 4. So as long as you have priority, you can just Legion another location to the Storm location. They play the Legion, nothing actually happens. They lose the game because they've devoted all of their efforts to that. They have played a grand total of 16 points on turns 3, 4, and 5. So as long as you're doing more points than that, you should be able to win the game. And so that's actually the worst thing about the combo right now, is that 2 of the 3 cards in it are better against it than in it.
Yeah, so KM is right that Legion is my favorite card ever printed in this game. And then second is Nico Minoru. For obvious reasons, Nico is just a flexible and toolbox-ish card, right? But Legion, personally, I feel like... So my pitch for Legion will and has always been that, like, locations are your 13th card in your deck, you know, because normally you don't have any control over, like, what the locations are. But Legion lets you control the 13th card in your deck, aka the location. So to me, it's one of the cards that has, like, a lot of utility and something that I will always love. But yeah, no, so now Legion is more relevant again also because I was thinking about this card because of the whole Agatha topic earlier, which is like it kind of wants you to play good 5s in your deck, and Legion is just like a generic good 5 right now. And also I guess at least for the next week or so, people will be doing this War Machine Storm thing. They're just gonna try, and then you naturally have a Legion in your deck that, like, you know, just counteracts that. I don't know how long Legion will stay relevant. Like maybe if like this whole War Machine thing eventually goes away, they might be better 5s to even consider. But for now, I'm just very glad that, like, we get a chance to, like, I think Legion is good now because the meta is not just like that fast, you know. It's a lot of points, yes, but it's not that fast per se. And I would say that, like, I like Legion right now because it has additional use case to beat the that Storm meme machine deck as well.
One of the things that's been a bit of a struggle for me is finding a deck that doesn't feel like it's just high rolling right now. Like, if you want to go play a Wiccan deck, you miss a curve, your opponent is playing Wiccan, they snap you. If you want to go play, like, against a deck that is playing this combo with the War Machine and the Legion, they snap you, you just kind of have to leave. There's a lot of, like, oh, I lose, guess I'm leaving on turn 4 in this metagame. And I have been looking for a deck that's just, like, able to accept snaps. My best decks are when I can accept and turn snaps on my opponents. Those are consistently the decks I perform the best with. And Bounce is a great version of that. And I just wanted to let everyone know that, like, yeah, you know, you don't have to be too afraid of this War Machine stuff. If they get it, they get it. But you can still play Bounce. The numbers here are still quite solid. You can even, if you're super afraid of Storm in, like, in the non-War Machine context, you can do things like put a Hitmonkey there and then put a Symbiote Spider-Man there, and then on the final turn, activate Symbiote Spider-Man onto the Hitmonkey, getting all the points from the cards you played on the other lanes. That's one way to beat Storm if they aren't full comboing you. And if they are full comboing you, it's only 2 cubes ever. So, you know.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on this one except for the fact that, like, I really strongly believe that, like, Bounce is still just the one of the decks that have the most points right now as well. And like Kian mentioned as well, you don't really need to worry too much about that whole Storm Legion War Machine deck, aka making your bounce deck dead. Your bounce deck is not dead. Your bounce deck would be dead if there's a single card called Professor X from the past that comes back, yes. But, like, this is not the case. This is a 3-card combo that sometimes just never happens. And if it happens, like KM said again, two cubes or less, you know. If you even know what's up, you can even get away with just 1 cube retreat, you know. So I feel like bounce in general is just, like, so much points, and shouldn't be too discouraged if you guys like the deck. That's all.
I will also note that I've kind of been playing some bounceless bounce recently. Just, like, straight up points deck. Like, basically, like, closer to Noki than it is to anything else. But it's just like, yeah, I want to play Gwenpool, Mysterio, Hitmonkey, get a big Mysterio, do some points on the final turn of the game, play US Agent. Just numbers are good in the current metagame. And, like, those 2 decks, Bounceless Bounce and Wolf Bounce, are the closest I've gotten to just, like, a deck that feels like it doesn't have to retreat when its opponent does the stupid thing. And I really appreciate that. Silver Sable and Hydra Bob have emerged as, like, the class of 1-drops. And that's not to say they're, like, flat out the best, but other 1-drops like Nico Minoru and the Hood are sort of contextual. You need to be a certain type of deck to best take advantage of them. Whereas you just see Silver Sable and Hydra Bob in whatever points pile you want. They're just there. They're just hanging out, doing good things. And I think that's worth talking about because we've almost never in the game of Marvel Snap had a one drop that we're like, I'm happy to curve this out. It's never existed.
Correct.
It's always been a synergy piece for something else, like Squirrel Girl with Mockingbird and Marvel Boy, right? It's never just been like, I'm just going to play this one drop on turn one and it's going to be good. We've never had that before, and we have it now, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, so this one caught me a bit by surprise, but the more I think about it, I actually don't think there's any reason for me to be surprised as well. Like initially, I was like thinking, okay, Nico Minoru is probably still the more like good one drop, right? But then I realized, like what KM mentioned, that Nico Minoru is not a 1/5, and like in certain cases she's a 1/4 due to the buff, and in certain cases she's a 1/8 due to some random other things. But like she's not like a definitive 1/5, you know. Like Sable, the moment you play it on turn one, your opponent almost always plays the card that they get from Sable. That gets like reduced by Sable anyway. So I think she's the closest thing to a definitive 1/5 with no downside that you can get in the game right now. So when I noticed Sable being played in like almost literally every deck that like plays stats, I started to think like, oh, actually Sable is like way easier to fit in like everything compared to Nico, right? It's like the very definitive 1/5, and also like similarly to Bob, right? I know Bob has like a quote unquote downside with the snap thing, but it's not really a downside, is it? Like when you're talking about downsides, I would say Titania is a riskier downside, which is why you don't and have never seen Titania in a points deck. You don't see people playing like random Titania as the one drop in your like stats based deck, right? Because the downside is harder to mitigate. Also, these decks don't always clock their locations. It's not a clock deck, you know. So I would say Sable and Bob seem to be a lot more of the de facto. All right, this is just a good card to put into any deck, so I can play something for one. It's funny that even Nebula doesn't fulfill this role as hard, because Nebula can very easily be not a 1/5. It could be a 1/1 the entire game a lot of the time, right? Because your opponent's in control of its points potential, for example. So I'm very, I would say I was a bit surprised, but then the more I think about it, I'm actually not surprised anymore that Sable is being played in like so many different decks.
Sable's just like generically good and was just on the spotlight, so just a bunch of people are just like, I don't have any better ideas. Let me play Silver Sable. And if you're,
it's just a good card anyway, right? It's just
good. And Hydra Bob, I think, like, you talk about it like downside, upside. I honestly look at his ability as a wash. But frankly, when I play it, it's more upside than downside. But again, if I told you you could play a 1/5 vanilla, which is effectively what having an ability like that is, you would do it every time. That's 2.5 times a Misty Knight. What are we talking about here? People play Stature, who is 2 points more than this guy, and go through effort to get to Stature, and you can just put him in your deck.
Literally.
It's crazy.
I just want to add one more thing as well. I think it's so obvious that you are supposed to play a 1/5 in most decks, because we are playing 3/5s, guys. Like we are playing a 3 mana 5 power. Why wouldn't we want to play a 1 mana 5 power?
The other thing that I really want to talk about with Bob is like, that guy shouldn't be a 5 power. It just like, that's a mistake. As far as I'm concerned, that is a mistake. That is not a card they should have printed. It should not have 5 power. That, like, when we talk about like the 3/5 stuff like that's bad. That's really bad. That card, I get why it's like, okay, it wasn't doing very well, you had to buff it, but like, the number on the card matters so much more the less the card costs.
Right.
And that card costs as little as a card possibly can. And it's like, you wouldn't print a 0/3. And I don't know why you'd print a 1/5. Like,
but would you play a 1/4, Bob?
You probably wouldn't. But he's right now, he's just so problematic, right? Where it's just like, what else are you supposed to play if you don't have Hydra Bob? Nothing? There's nothing even close to replicating what he does? If you don't have Hydra Bob,
right?
Yeah, like, it's Sable. It's literally Sable, and it's like, oh, sorry, you don't have these 2 cards that came out the last 2 months? You're screwed. Good luck playing points right now. I don't like that at all, man. I don't like it. Let's talk about Wiccan. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Wiccan, but
Wiccan.
I have had just awful experiences with traditional Wiccan decks into what people are playing right now, where it's just like, the meta got shaken up in such a way that, like, I don't know a better way to say this. You have a losing matchup to Agatha. Like, you just
Yeah.
straight up have a losing matchup to Agatha. And this is a deck that was, like, at the top of the metagame, losing matchup to Agatha. Because you just don't do
Wow.
enough points. And because Wiccan as a mid-range shell is very hard to get a card like Shang-Chi into because it wants to be curving out so hard. And so it's just an awkward deck building puzzle that I think eventually does get solved by either not being a Wiccan deck or just shoving Shang-Chi in there. I tried doing some of that. It was okay. But ultimately, you just end up in spots where you actually cannot beat Lady Sif Ghost Rider pulling the Agatha, Black Bolt,
Mhm.
Claw Stature. That's just more points than you have every single time.
Yeah, actually, I like this very important mention of Wiccan decks find it difficult to play Shang-Chi. I think it's a super important point because,
Mhm.
like you said, right, there's only 12 cards in the Marvel Snap that you need to build the curve. Like, okay, this is not like cerebral levels of restrictiveness, of course, but like you need to build a curve whereby you are making the Wiccan thing happen very often on turn 4, right? And if that's the case, means every one Shang-Chi-ish kind of card you play in your deck is like not a 1-drop or not a 2 or not a 3. So it's actually really tight on space, and because these Wiccan decks don't naturally fit the Shang, they also naturally lose to like a very consistent Ghost Rider into Hela. Sorry, not Hela. A very consistent Ghost Rider into Agatha on, which is very similar. I said Hela because it's like so much points as well, but Ghost Rider into Agatha on turn 4. It's a very consistent thing that happens with the current style of Agatha decks. So I would say that like it's also because the top end of the Wiccan decks are like Alive, right?
Yeah.
By the time it becomes a relevant card, the Alive, your opponent's points are already all there,
Yeah.
Like
And also, they have
yeah,
priority. It's
exactly. 614, dude.
yeah.
Yeah. Even like the turn 5 of like the Agatha decks is so strong, right? It's just like just playing the best 5s in the game. You play the Black Bolt or you play the Legion, you play the Vision or whatever. It's just some of the best 5s. Oh, Claw's 10 points, yeah.
12.
Oh,
Like,
12, right.
the
12,
the
12.
the the archetypal Agatha curve to me is uh who gives a crap about turn 1, turn 2, turn
Mm.
3 either Moon Knight or Lady Sif, turn 4 Ghost Rider or Ebony Blade, turn 5 Black Bolt, turn 6 Claw Stature. And I don't know if people are aware of this, like turn 6 Claw Stature is infinitely modular. You can do anything you want with that. Like, you can put
Yes.
4 power in one lane and 15 in another. You can put 11 power in one lane and 8 in another. You can do 4 power in one lane, 8 power in one lane, 7 power in another. It's like a Doctor Doom, but you pick and choose. It's just 19 points that you basically get to put wherever you want at any given time. Ridiculously good right now.
Yeah, there's like 5 different, like I was just counting it in my head just now. There's like 5 different positionings you can do, right? You can do like claw left or mid, and then the stature can go in 3 different
Yes.
locations, right? So there's like 5 different permutations you need to actually think about.
It's
And like you
horrible.
said, 19 points. It's like doing the bounce thing, but you are actually playing very huge units that don't
Yes.
require a lot of little shitters.
Yeah, it's like you get output similar to some bounce output, but you made no sacrifices to get there. In fact, you discarded their cards. So it's like,
Also you were chatting with chat for like 5 minutes before that
yes.
because it's so simple.
Yes. Where are you on Madam Web right now?
I'm very sad on Madam Web right now. But okay,
Really?
let me no, I'm sad because I need to explain. Okay, so what Madam Web is to me is like what Madam Web is to like movement combo-ish stuff to me is like what Marvel Boy is to me for Zoo. Because this one card is supposed to like enable an archetype, right? Like what Marvel Boy did for Zoo was that like it just made it so that the power level of the deck went through the roof, and it was like a relevant thing for quite a while. But the different and Madam Web is supposed to do that for move bounce and that kind of thing, right? Because it's such a low cost card that lets you like dictate the plays or how much you want to increase your cards in terms of power, whether you want to move the thing even at all or not. So it's supposed to be like that kind of like level of enabler. But the problem and the difference is that Marvel Boy is you just leave it there on the board and it does the thing. Whereas for Madam Web, you actually need to be like good at doing stuff. Like, okay, this is the funny way of saying this, but I feel like for Madam Web to be good, you kind of need to be a bit better than just like everyone else, a bit, because like it's a card that is within fully your control. Like how good the card gets really depends on where you move the thing, if you move the thing, how you move the thing. All these things aren't Agatha-ish. All these things are just purely you. So I feel like Madam Web is a bit like I don't see it as much, and I don't think any like super prominent like best Venom Web deck has like been out there yet, because I feel like this style of card is not like globally easy to use. Like you actually need to like know the meta and like know positionings and like know timings of moving and not moving things. Like it's a good card that is very highly skill gated, I would say.
Finally, let's talk a little bit about deterministic win conditions, what I like to
100%
call
does.
100%ers, and their overwhelming popularity and lack of popularity with two different segments of the Marvel Snap fan base. Popular extremely with whoever is playing them, unpopular with whoever is playing against them. And I guess part of me is wanting to say something along the lines of like, these things have never had appropriately tuned discourse about them because they are so
Yes.
polarizing when they happen that it's impossible to react to them in a way that is meaningful. This storm combo is the least oppressive and annoying of these kind of deterministic win conditions we've ever had
Yeah.
by a significant margin. When you look at like Profex Cannonball, you had to make 0 sacrifices to get that into the best mid-range core in the entire game. It was awful. It was also 2 cards. When you look at like clog decks, right, which I personally think are a little overtuned right now, again, very few sacrifices you make, you just get to be good. When you look at decks that used to be like this, Leech decks, where Leech was only ever playable when you had the rest of the deck covering for it with massive tempo, throwing Leech into Lockjaw or Stones from Thanos or Aurashem, Doc Ock, same thing. The rest of the deck has to cover for it with massive tempo, but when it is playable because the rest of the deck is broken, right? And so I keep coming to the conclusion that if it is okay to have one of them in this game, it probably is this. No?
Yeah. So when I just want to add one thing about deterministic win conditions is that it's the number one thing people whine about the most, and so the number one thing that people like win the most with as well. You know, like you see on Twitter, you see the whole in the past, right? Aliyah, Prof X, all that kind of stuff. Like people are most upset about it because they know they die when this
Yes.
happens. But people are also most happy and win the most with this
Because they
because
know
they
they
know
win.
they win. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So it's a very interesting thing, right? Like these kind of combos or cards give you the confidence to snap as well. Like it's like the easy way out kind of snap. Not saying it's bad. I mean, it's fine to have some of like these kind of snap conditions in the deck. Like even in the past, right? Like a low-key semi-deterministic win condition, which is the reason that people are confident to snap, is Mind Stone on 1 in the past, remember?
Right.
With Thanos. Mind Stone snap is semi-deterministic because it gives you the confidence that you will win. So like 100%ers here are just like, it's just a thing that I feel like will always exist in this game to a certain extent, and people will always be either happy or unhappy about it, because when you're doing it like KM said, you're really happy, you're confident, you snap, you win. If you are getting hit by it, you are upset because you're also very confident that you will lose here. You know, so I feel like these things are very interesting, and like will we ever stop complaining about this? No. But will we also ever stop like feeling good when we do it to our opponent? Also no. So yeah, this is just the way that the game will be.
I will say, I agree with the substance of what you said, but I'm going to take issue with one thing, which is the
Okay.
word semi-deterministic. Because it's like,
Okay.
you either are or you aren't, okay? Like, that's not, you can't be like semi 100%. That's not a
For
thing.
what it's worth, when I was snapping Mind Stone on 1, I was winning a lot. So let's
Sure.
just put it closer to deterministic.
You can be favored, but I don't think you can be semi-deterministic. Like that's the whole point of what the word means.
Fine.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would like to propose something semi-deterministically to you, and that is that you click the follow and subscribe buttons for this channel. Remember, you are semi-deterministically locked into doing this. Lambie, take us out.
Thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope you guys enjoyed yourself, and we'll see you guys in the next one on KM's channel. Bye-bye.